Back in 2017, I was at my peak of chonkiness as I was solely focused on powerlifting with very little wiggle room for anything else. And it's safe to say at this point that the thought of running to the shops filled me full of dread, let alone running 100 miles. So how on earth did I go from being somebody that was solely focused on the gym to balancing both heavy lifting and endurance training simultaneously, you ask? Well, as somebody who has lived and breathed the hybrid mentality for the past 5 years, in today's video I'm going to break down some of the key considerations and things that I've done so that you can do the same. Now, before we dive into the meat and bones of today's video, I thought for those of you that might be new around here, it's worth breaking down what the journey has been like for the past 5 years in terms of my events, challenges, and training. Here is my hybrid career thus far. Very brief little bit of context: found myself falling out of love with powerlifting, found myself doing a job I wasn't loving in London, and decided in summer of 2018 that I needed a drastic change to make me feel more fulfilled, which led me to my first big challenge, which was my attempt to squat 500,000 kilos in 24 hours to represent the 500,000 deaths by suicide in men every single year. I did this for Movember and raised just over £25,000 in doing so, along the way discovering my love for hybrid training and the aerobic capacity that came with it. Spoiler alert, my MCL left the building after just over 129,000 kilos and over 2,000 reps with 60 kilos on a back squat, but we raised a lot of money and had a good time along the way. I then found myself in crutches looking for a goal. I was quickly signed off to swim and then knew I could quickly get back on a bike, and then soon after that I'd be able to run. So obviously I signed up for my first triathlon, which was Ironman Lanzarote, which I did in May of 2019 and came in just under 15 hours and really found a love for triathlon and endurance sports in general in doing so. I then moved on to 3 charity events in the month of November that year for the same charity, as I couldn't go bigger but I could go broader. On the first of the month I did 6,890 meters of bodyweight lunges to represent some statistics around suicide prevention in the UK, and then moving into the middle of the month I did a 13-man 13-hour workout to represent some similar statistics, followed by a 94-mile run from Loch Lomond to Edinburgh to represent statistics on the charity side of things as well, and then obviously rounded up to a cool 100 once I'd hit the finishing location. Moving into 2020, I was training for the Keltman Scottish Extreme Triathlon whilst also training for a powerlifting competition, and then the world got turned upside down.
You must stay at home.
So I pivoted into attempting to become the first person to squat 500 pounds and run a sub 5-minute mile in the same day. And whilst I did get beaten by a week by Adam Klink in Virginia, I did become the second person to do it, so thought I'd add an endurance element on top and ran a marathon as well. Not a day I'd recommend, but one that I very much enjoyed, brackets, upon reflection. Whilst training for that, I was simultaneously training for Project Vertical, which was myself and Johnny, my coach of 5 years and business partners, attempt to continuously ascend Ben Nevis to raise money for men's mental health and Movember in November that year. And along the way, I ran an easy 3-hour 17 marathon in training, and then went up and down Ben Nevis, the biggest mountain in Scotland and the UK, over 25 times within 11 days. And again, my knees had a pretty bad time. After Project Vertical, we'd hit a cumulative total of just under £100,000 raised for Movember and men's mental health, so did a little bit more work to get it over the line with a giveaway, and then decided that that was a nice round number to put the charity stuff on hold for a few years before building to one big project in a few years' time. Early 2021, I was still recovering from Project Vertical, as it certainly did take its toll, but I got roped in at 3 weeks' notice to a 100-kilometre run with my brother, which I didn't particularly enjoy, but got through nonetheless. Then in June 2021, I completed the Keltman Scottish Extreme Triathlon. And then at the end of July, exactly 1 year on from the 500-pound squat and sub 5-minute mile on the same day, I did a 1,200-pound powerlifting total and sub 12-hour Ironman distance triathlon in the same day. What a way to honour the anniversary. 6 months on from that, in December, 2 days before my birthday in fact, I decided to give myself the worst birthday gift of all time, very sore legs, by completing a 600-kilo powerlifting total into a sub 6-hour 60-kilometre ultramarathon in the same day. In April 2022, I became the 184th person to lift the Dinnie Stones, the 332-kilo, 730-pound, massive blocks of heritage and storytelling up in Aberdeenshire, and felt very at home in doing so. We then moved on to Keltman Round 2 in June of 2022, where I was pleased with my improvement in performance, which then rolled into training for and executing the double brutal extreme triathlon, which was a 7.6k swim, a 373k bike, and a 84.4k run with 8,200 meters of elevation gain in total. Not far off the height of Everest. And most recently, I doubled the Goggins 4x4x48 challenge to complete a 4x4x96 challenge, 4 miles every 4 hours for 4 days. And obviously along the way in training, I've ran loads of ultras, I've swam locks end to end, I've done a lot of training volume that's sort of been big volume, big achievements in and of itself. And I want to make clear, I've absolutely loved every minute of it.
I'm pissed off. I'm feeling pretty dreadful. This is pretty unkind at this stage, actually, isn't it?
Yes, it's been tough. Yes, it's been demanding, but the reward it gives me and the value it gives me as an individual is why I believe that you should explore this for yourself. So point number one is an obvious one, but it's one that's even more important when it comes to hybrid training, and that is to set clear goals and know exactly what you want to achieve. I know what you're thinking, oh, a YouTube video about goal setting, how original, but no. When it comes to hybrid training, the biggest mistake that people can often make is thinking that they can just sort of airy-fairy, make it up as they go along, when in reality, because you're turning down the dials on how much you can do in terms of training on separate sports, you need to be really specific and intentional with what your training looks like to be able to achieve your goals. I don't want to imply there's anything wrong with training for the sake of training or just to move your body and keep yourself healthy, but if you do want to achieve specific performance goals in separate disciplines, you're going to need to know what those goals are and therefore set a plan towards how you're going to get there. Otherwise, you're going to fall into the trap that most people fall into, which can be doing too much volume, focusing too much on intensity, not eating enough, not recovering enough, and falling into a lot of the mistakes that a lot of people make that come to us at Omnia Performance to rectify with hybrid training. To make this point as simply as I can, if you want to get stronger and run faster, then I would recommend that you set some clear number goals in the gym and a clear distance and time goal for your running, because then that way you know exactly what benchmarks, milestones you're working towards, and you can feel a sense of achievement along the way and enjoy the process of figuring out how you balance the two, but also knowing that there is an endpoint to work towards so that you can adjust your training specifically with those goals in mind. Point number two is to learn to accept and in fact embrace your own unique limitations or strengths. We are not all built the same way, and that is a fantastic thing. We are all the best possible version of being ourselves, and that is something that we shouldn't take for granted. Pseudo-motivational quotes aside, it still baffles me how much people try and compare themselves to others, or I want to look like Phil Heath, therefore I'm going to train like Phil Heath, when in reality you're forgetting about the 25 years of lifting that Phil Heath has done before looking like Phil Heath. The example I always use comes from a UK context whereby Tom Martin is one of the best powerlifters in the country, and you often see him pulling RPE 9 deficit deadlifts on a Monday, and then RPE 9 block pull on a Wednesday, and then an RPE 9 triple from the floor on Friday. And he can do it pretty consistently at really high weight percentages. He comes from a sprinting background and clearly has a huge tolerance for intensity. Whereas if I deadlift over 90% once, I can't do it again for 2 to 3 weeks. However, on the flip side, I have a high tolerance for volume, so therefore I can establish what my strengths and weaknesses are, know what parameters I'm working in, and therefore program and move forwards accordingly. And you should be doing the same. As always, context is absolutely critical, and Gary, with 4 kids, a desk job, and a wife he's doing his best to keep happy, versus the 18-year-old with a trust fund who's just gone to a university that doesn't really have much contact time, but wants to be training 3 hours a day and have steak delivered to him whilst he goes to sleep with an IV drip, are not the same context to consider, which means their approach to training should be entirely different. In the same way that I'm sitting here talking to you on camera, having done a lot of work over the years to put myself in this position, so you shouldn't compare yourself to the way that I train directly. You shouldn't think, well, Fergus does X, Y, and Z on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, therefore if I'm not doing that, then I'm not approaching things in the right way, because it is not as simple, it's not as binary as that. That's why at Omnia Performance, Johnny, my personal coach and I's business, with over 1,500 athletes active worldwide, we're very much focused on understanding the holistic stresses that go into a person's existence, because when you're balancing different disciplines, you only have so much to give within the context of a week, within the context of a month. And if you're turning down certain dials on your endurance training and turning up certain dials on your lifting, your recovery, your stress level, your ability to output, your ability to get in the right headspace for certain sessions is going to be massively impacted by having an argument with your boss that day, or Gary not necessarily keeping his wife as happy as he'd like to, or trust fund kid getting told by his dad with a Swiss bank that in fact there's been some illegitimacy concerns over from the IRS in America, which means that actually his payment this month isn't coming through on time. And those are all stresses that the person needs to take on board and manage within the context of their training. Because the biggest mistake people make when hybrid training is taking 100% of one program, 100% of another, and going like that. And that is 200% output, which is too much in the first place. But far too many people are treating themselves like robots, where they're viewing their inputs in, looking at the outputs out, without considering the context of the individual. So consider your background, your strengths, your weaknesses, your lifestyle, and plan accordingly. Point number 3 is quite difficult to explain, and I don't quite have faith that I'm going to do it justice, but I'm going to try my best. So please do bear with me. And if we refer back to my hybrid career resume from earlier, I think the best example of this is when I was in crutches with only the ability to swim before I went into my first triathlon, Ironman Lanzarote. Because I knew what I was capable of, I built my capacity there before I then stacked on the biking and then I stacked on the running. And that's because I was working within my individual context at the time to plan what realistic goals came next. So by this I mean allow your fitness to be transient, allow your fitness to be undulating in terms of where the focus points are, because if you go from a 100-mile ultramarathon and then decide that you want to do a powerlifting competition 3 weeks later, you're not going to be in peak shape for a powerlifting competition. So maybe it's a case of doing a marathon or a half marathon en route to a powerlifting competition 6 months down the line. You need to plan your year and plan your goals with the variations in mind, because if you're going to one end of the spectrum and then to the other, that means that you're going to obviously have to reduce one to progress in the other, depending on how much you want to perform, and you're going to have to take a hit. Hybrid training does not mean being excellent at all things at all times. It means compromise. So you need to be tactical with your goal setting, tactical with your ambitions, and realistic with your timelines on what you can achieve within the context of your current fitness abilities and where you would like them to be. And between A to B, there's going to be a lot of micro goals that you can set along the way to keep things interesting, but you're not going to go from a 100-mile race to performing well in a powerlifting competition unless you've been doing both in equal measure as part of your prep. So if you're going from a 100-mile race, set some goals along the way before a powerlifting competition where you're reducing your running volume as you're increasing your weight training volume. Don't be naive and expecting to just be fantastic and do all things at all times, because you'll run out of time, you'll run out of adaptive energy, your food bill will be astronomical, your friends will hate you, you'll be getting through laundry like there's no tomorrow, and you'll probably ruin all of your relationships that you hold dearly. So in short, look at your fitness abilities and then translate them into a next goal to translate them into a next goal, so that you've got some stepping stones along the way where you're turning up certain dials in strength or turning down certain dials in strength, and vice versa in endurance. You can't go from one end of the spectrum to the other. Respect and honor the work between them and do the work. Point number 4 is a simple one, and it is to always be a student. And that means abandoning the ego. It means that accepting that just because you're excellent at one thing, it doesn't mean that you're immediately going to be excellent at another. And I was a great example of this when I went from being not excellent at powerlifting, but I was competing internationally, to having to remember how to run consistently over a long period of time. I had to really focus on my gait. I had to really consider how I was moving and how it was impacting me. But immediately from the off, I kind of managed to put my ego to the side because I was doing that training as part of a charity event. So there was a big reason why that was driving me forwards. But for recreational athletes, there might not be that deeper reason why. It might just be wanting forward progress, forward motion, and individual development. So really try and approach things as a student, be open to new ideas, be open to learning, be open to improving, and you'll reach your performance goals much quicker because you'll be able to adapt and pick things up as you go. And you can learn the skill of running, the skill of lifting, the skill of riding a bike, the skill of swimming. You can be adaptive, you can be responsive, and you can make more progress than you otherwise might if you just full on ego it and think that you're great at everything, because all that's going to do is mean that you splash about in the pool very aggressively and kids are going to start bashing you with noodles because you're making such a noise, and you might crash your bike.
That is my face. Not good.
And if you're out running, you could end up being one of these people that decides, because you eat loads of food before your leg session on a Saturday morning, that you eat loads of food before your long run and end up shitting yourself. And nobody wants that, do they now? So to summarize point number 4, don't shit your pants, always be a student, and abandon the ego. So for our 5th and final point today, I want to emphasize how important it is to be informed and intentional with the way that you're training. And that means checking out things online, learning from other people's mistakes, and really being deliberated in how you put your training together, why you do certain things on what days, why you do things in certain orders, what you're training for, why you're training for it at that time of the year, all of these considerations. If you have the means, I highly recommend a coach. I had Johnny coaching me from day one, which took my analytical mind elsewhere to stop me from overthinking, thinking I should be changing things, thinking that I'd made mistakes, thinking that I should be doing more intensity, thinking that I should be doing more volume, thinking that I should be doing less, thinking that I should be eating more, and actually outsourced it to somebody else from the off, where I had clear structures to work to and to just get my head down and crack on with the training, because that's what I'm good at doing, that's what I enjoy doing, and if I know what I'm doing, where I need to be doing it, when I need to be doing it, I can factor it into my schedule and I can crack on. Whereas when I've been self-coached in the past, and I know this is the same for others, you often find yourself constantly reassessing the plan, thinking I need to change this, need to change that, when in reality what you need to be doing is consistently moving things forwards. And that's where, obviously I'm biased, I would recommend Omnia Performance as a coaching facility. We have one-to-one options, we have training programs that are a bit more generalized for base training and hybrid training, generally speaking, without goals. Or if you do have a specific goal, then we have a variety of 16 and 17-week plans that can set you up specifically for your lifting and running or triathlon. There's lots of options in there, and we have a whole load more coming very soon. So at the very least, check out the website, check us out on social media, and sign up to the email list down below, please. Thank you very much. But other than that, I talk about a lot of these things on my YouTube channel. There's other resources out there, and I just encourage you to not get sucked too much into the rabbit hole of thinking about things like the interference effect, thinking about things like how perfect can I make this training program, because a lot of nailing hybrid training and making progress from the off is simply scaling back your expectations of what you're capable of within the week to allow for the additional fatigue of additional disciplines, abandoning the ego and be willing to take a hit on your preconceived ideas of how much you need to be doing to move forwards, and rolling with the punches of fatigue, demand, soreness that comes with it, and be willing to adapt, take the time to learn enough about yourself as an athlete to get your head down and consistently do the work to move things forwards over time. You absolutely can balance strength training and endurance training if you go about it in the right way, but you also absolutely can get it wrong, which people have been doing for years and years and years, and then they point the finger and say, nope, you can't balance the two, I'm going to go back to my single discipline sport and stay in that box. Humans aren't built to put themselves in boxes, and whilst we like to identify with certain groups and certain things, I get a huge amount of value from sort of dipping my toe in lots of little boxes and enjoying triathlon, enjoying the mountains, enjoying lifting, enjoying elements of CrossFit, enjoying elements of ultra running, enjoying elements of track work. And I don't really feel like I identify or align myself with any one of those boxes in and of itself, but I feel like I get to enjoy doing lots of fun things in fun places with fun people, and I feel like a pretty reliable, competent jack of all trades. And if anyone's going to say, well, you're a master of none, you're probably not a master of anything either. So you can put your comment down, but I don't think anyone's really going to be on your side. So to summarize today's video, I have gained a huge amount of value as an athlete and as an individual from training across disciplines and being a jack of all trades over the years. It's set me better up for my business life, it's set me better up for my personal life, and it's given me access to the outdoors and gyms and new people and new things and new experiences that I never would have done had I just stayed in my lane as a big boy powerlifter. So if you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching. Do make sure to like the video, comment down below with your thoughts, feelings, anecdotes, questions, etc. Please check out Omnia and link in the description down below, as that's ultimately where all of the substance on the things I've referenced today is really brought to life, and there's ways that you can get involved and have some clear direction for your training. Obviously, please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. It really helps the channel out and helps us keep moving things forward for more exciting, bigger, crazier projects. And I very much hope to see you next time. Goodbye.